What does it feel like to live in, or perhaps I should say from, the state of abundance? I'm going to talk about it in today's video. Hey everyone, I'm Sonja. Welcome to Holiness Connection. And today I just wanted to talk about the qualities, what it feels like to live in or from the state of abundance. And I'll talk a little bit later about why you could think of it either way, as living in the state of abundance or as from the state of abundance. But first I wanted to talk about sort of 8 different qualities that I particularly notice when I'm living in or from that state of abundance. And I want to distinguish a little bit here. This overlaps with what it feels like in a spiritual awakening, because often we do become conscious of that state of abundance. But the reason I didn't say what does it feel like to have a spiritual awakening is because that can have other elements as well. So that can have elements, for example, of growth or suddenly getting on a healing path. And then on the other side of it, people sometimes can feel into the state of abundance without something that they fully would call a spiritual awakening. I would argue that they definitely are feeling into the present moment, but they might not put the word spiritual awakening on it. So I instead want to talk about the state of abundance. And the state of abundance, is talked about in various traditions. In my own tradition of mystical Christianity, it is what the kingdom of heaven that Jesus refers to means. So I'm just using the word abundance as an easy way to talk about it across different traditions. And because of, the qualities I'll mention that you can say, and some could feel like a feeling of abundance. But of course, there's lots of other words that we could put on it. All right, so just a quick rundown of the qualities that I've noticed in the state of abundance, or that kingdom of heaven state that we are when we are living in it, noticing it, or you could think of it as coming from it. And like I said, I'll talk a little bit more about what that means later. So number 1 is faith. And what I mean by that is faith that everything's okay, that everything's going to be okay, that everything is okay. It's what I refer to in a lot of my other videos as the all is wellness. Which I took from Julian of Norwich, saying all manner of things shall be well, and that quote from her after she did have a spiritual awakening. And so there's that feeling of peace, I guess you could say, peace, and that feeling that everything is okay. And I should mention here that it doesn't have to do with external circumstances and whether or not we would want to change them. So it's deeper or like more pervasive than what's actually going on that we may very well want to change, or that we don't think of as, necessarily okay. But there's this underlying feeling into of that. So the second feeling that one has in a state of abundance, that connects very much to me using that word abundance for it in some, is this, deep understanding that there's enough for everyone. So the scarcity mindset that we often have is just out the window. There's just no scarcity mindset anymore. And so we know that that's not, we just have this inner sense when we're feeling into it that that's not how abundance works. Kind of like love. It's like more, someone having more of it could mean you have more of it, right? It's not more like this pie that's getting divided up. And that can be in all kinds of ways, right? So that could be about something financial, more in that kind of a way, resources or financial. It could also be, like I mentioned, love. It can be in any of those things that we sometimes, often actually, can get into the scarcity mentality about. That's just gone. And we know that that's not how abundance works, and that abundance can just keep flowing, that it can keep flowing. There's not a limited amount of it, a limited source of it. So the third way that abundance, the state of abundance, feels is trust. So a little different from faith that I was just talking about, the word trust, the feel of that, the flavor of that. And it's really like this, you don't feel like you need to overplan. Maybe you do some planning, maybe you don't, but you're pretty accepting of whatever the next step is, and that coming to you, trusting your intuition on it, whether you call it intuition, whether you call it being guided. There's a lot of trust in what unfolds as the path unfolds. The fourth way that living in a state of abundance feels is just completely devoid of anxiety. So many of us live, myself included, sometimes get into these states of anxiety, or we are maybe prone to it. And one of the things that I noticed the most myself, and mine did start after a spiritual awakening, even though I've mentioned that it doesn't have to be. The time that I first, felt into this state of abundance was after a spiritual awakening. I remember it feeling, like I just wasn't anxious, so I felt very grounded in the present moment because of it. But also, it was like there was this lightening, almost a sense of I hadn't known there was a burden on my shoulders. And that's that burden, right, of trying to control or feeling like there's scarcity, so we have to do something. That just went away, and there was much more lightness, and absolutely changed such that there wasn't anxiety anymore. All right, the fifth way that it feels like when you are living in a state of abundance is joyful. So I just mentioned, this anxiety dropping away or sense of burden dropping away and feeling lighter. So you can see that that sort of dovetails with a sense of joy. And this sense of joy, again, this has nothing to do with outer circumstances. It's different. It's a different kind of joy. That is regardless of circumstances. So you could even have grief mixed in with joy. I have another video where I talk about the book Joy is My Justice that really goes into this, where joy is this, fundamental aspect of this state of abundance when we're living in it that doesn't have to do with outer circumstances. So the sixth way that living in a state of abundance feels like is a need not to control as much. So this can be related to lots of the ones above. It can be related to not feeling like you need to overplan and accepting what, the next step that's going to unfold for you. But it's really in this very broad way. We so much want to control things, and that is partly because of having the scarcity mindset and anxiety. And then when we don't have those and we are feeling into the abundance, that feeling of needing to control just relaxes. And what's great about that is really then we start living in the flow. And it's not at all about not, participating in the dance of, of being in the universe and interacting and, having projects that we do. It's not about not engaging with that. We absolutely can engage with that, but there's this less of a need to control as much of it, like controlling, wanting the outcome to be a certain way, and so then doing everything towards that. As Ian Punnett said in an interview, the late Ian Punnett, that I did with him, when I asked about people's purpose and how they can, feel into that, he said, like, don't game it. So it's like when you're feeling into that state of abundance, you don't have that urge to game it because that feeling of wanting to control drops away. All right, the seventh way that the state of abundance feels like is being able to be in the present moment. And of course, we could talk about the state of abundance as being the present moment. So we could just like turn the definition around and say that there's a way of being in the present moment, and abundance is a flavor of it, that we could absolutely do that too. But since I'm talking about abundance as the fundamental aspect here, the present moment should get drawn in as well, though, because that's absolutely what it feels like. You're not, if you think about the anxiety pieces dropping away and the control dropping away, you can see that you become less future oriented. Doesn't mean you couldn't have a fun daydream about the future, think about it at all. Of course we can, but there's just what we are doing at all times is coming from the present moment, not the past, not the future. Even if those come in at times, we're coming from the present moment. We're feeling into it. We're right there living it. All right, the eighth and final way I want to talk about for now, about how the state of abundance feels like when we're living in and from that, it has to do with our connections to the whole and to others, which is something I very much emphasize on this channel and also in my Substack, Oneness Practices. So, kind of following from being in the present moment, when we're in the present moment, we can feel that. We can feel our connection to the greater whole. We don't feel separate. We can feel connections to others because of that, because we're all part of the greater whole as well. And so living in and from that state of abundance really allows us to drop the illusion of separation, to feel into our connection and our belonging with each other, with the universe, with the whole. And so that's a very, very beautiful thing that's just there. It's just there. It sounds, you don't even have to, I guess you could say that it's that have to be aware of it. But when you're in the state of abundance, that kind of awareness is already there, right? Because then you are living from the present moment. So if you're fully in the state of abundance and feeling it, that will just naturally be part of it. And I should say that I wore my eclipse t-shirt today. I did see that most recent eclipse, and it was so awe-inspiring because, that was such an awe-inspiring moment where I felt, you're seeing what it feels like, you should be seeing in outer space. So you're feeling this very expanded, awe-inspiring thing when you see an eclipse like that. But really, it's very related. So that feeling where you feel, not right in your monkey mind, and you're feeling this sense of awe, like that very much is what living in the state of abundance feels like. Because there's an awe to this underlying reality that is so beautiful and that doesn't have the scarcity, and where we are all connected. All right, so just to touch on what I've been alluding to this whole time about living in versus living from, and this is, just semantics. When you're really experiencing it, you don't feel the need to get into this much detail really. So, but just to explain what I meant by that, because, well, there is an important piece to it actually, if we're not in the state of abundance. So, and I'll tell you why. So living in the state, when I'm saying the word in, I'm alluding to the fact that it's really all right there for us, right? Like in any moment we could just pivot and from a monkey mind, from a scarcity mentality, and we could be in that state. So it's kind of like right there for us. That's what I mean. It's like pre-existing, it's there, it's the underlying reality. So when I say living in it, that's what I mean. When I say living from it though, is sort of our part of it, right? So our part of it is our own lens. And so living from it means when our own lens shifts such that we can live from it and we're seeing it and we're aware of it. So that is the distinction I'm making when I say living in it or living from it. And a teacher of mine, Cynthia Bourgeot, talks about it sometimes as an operating system, like which computer operating system are you running? And she does that to make the point that, you can't really be in both fully at the same time. I mean, I would argue sometimes you can have these little touches of something, right? And so it's really like you're going back and forth in the two lenses or the two operating systems. So that definitely happens. But they don't happen at the same time. You're not in both of them, the scarcity mentality or the abundance mentality at the same time. And so, if there's this lens aspect to things, which, I think there is, how can you get to it? How can you shift your lens? So that's an interesting question, right? Like I said, it's just there. Sometimes like there's sort of a grace moment and we just have that switch happen, or we have a spiritual awakening. But I would say overall that it's a combination between, or maybe it's both, that it can be either, between practice and letting go. So when we do practices, meditation or mindfulness practices, those kinds of things, that does tend to make us more easily able to feel into the state of abundance and to have that lens and to shift to that lens. On the other hand, I have another video on spiritual perfectionism, and, really like going after it, trying to cling to it, trying to get it is not the way to go, because that is coming from that scarcity mentality. So often it's about dropping layers, which is easier said than done, right? If you're really anxious, but dropping the anxiety, dropping into the present moment. So it's not about striving. It's almost about like letting go into practicing, shifting into it. But like I said, sometimes it just happens spontaneously as well. And I'll link to or put in the description box as well some other videos I have that perhaps could be helpful in thinking about this. I have one on spiritual touchstones and noticing them and cultivating experiences that you've had in order to remember that feeling, and then it often becomes easier to feel into it as well. So I will link some of those as well. So hopefully this was helpful. The why of this, I mean, you could say anything from that it feels good, because it does, to the fact that it does help us, which is so important to me with our oneness practices and with feeling into the greater whole, and that everyone has enough. So the way in which it affects us both as individuals, as part of the larger whole, and the connections to the greater whole, I think are reasons for this. But happily, it's not something that we would be trying to do and then it would feel bad. It actually feels fantastic. So hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if you have other flavors or qualities that you would add in yourself. You could put it in the description box below, or if you have any questions, I could go into this in further detail, any particular aspect of it as well. Thanks everyone for watching.